Welcome to D3 Nationals for Sky Magazine, presented by Spin Ultimate. We're here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm Jimmy Leppert.
I'm Charlie Enders.
And we're going to do a quick recap of Saturday's play. Starting with Open, in round one, we saw Amherst come out with a big zone. This zone was able to force a lot of turns, and that wasn't just in round one. Throughout the day, they would throw their zone, and not only, other teams would make mistakes just on their own. Amherst was getting a lot of Ds through their cup wall. They were running two different zones. But especially if the other team was impatient, Amherst just pounced on it and was able to get the disc back. But then outside of that, they were also very patient on O. Zone's really tiring, and usually teams like to go out, they get the disc and throw it right away for the score. They're hoping for a score, but Amherst was very patient, and that allowed them to get a lot of break opportunities. Also in round one, we saw the Middlebury Pranksters beat the Metro East Stevens Tech. They were the number one seed in Pool C, Stevens Tech. Middlebury the third seed, and Middlebury just came out and were dominant all game long. Stevens Tech did not look like they had any energy. On to round two. John Brown came out against Wake Forest and started early by executing on all of their risks. There were a few hammer throws that probably shouldn't have been completed, but were brought down. There was a huge sky that was brought down by John Brown. John Brown is a team that runs very tight lines because they don't have any players, but they have a lot of energy. And before the tournament, they told me they were going to come in here and try to outcondition every team. Against Wake Forest, that was definitely working, but Wake Forest was also being a little too conservative against the zone, and John Brown was able to convert on all of their break chances because of Wake Forest's mistake. So John Brown beat Wake Forest, the number one seed in Pool D, to start the day. Also in round two, Puget Sound had a very close game with Lehigh. They were trading back and forth who had the lead, and Puget Sound came out on top, and defense was the difference. Towards the end of the game, there were some key adjustments made by Puget Sound that allowed them to win that game. On to round three, Middlebury versus GOP, Carleton College, the defending champions here at D3 Nationals. It turned out to be a big game because it seemed like that would decide the pool, since Middlebury had beaten Stevens Tech earlier in the day, and GOP had also won their first game against Georgia College. Middlebury at first built a huge lead on kind of unlucky mistakes by GOP. And Middlebury's coach actually told me during the game, as they had a 3-goal lead, I believe it was 11-8, that he still thought GOP could come back and win the game. And he wasn't comfortable with their lead. And just like that, Reese Lindmark, who was huge last year at D3 Nationals, went out 1 point, came back the next 2 points, and broke the Middlebury lines. But Middlebury ended up winning off of a high stall huck, and there was a great layout grab for the score to win that game. During round three, we also saw the wind picked up a lot. Early in the day, it was a little chilly, not too windy though, nothing that was really affecting any of the games. But by round three, and then continuing through the rest of the day, the wind had picked up, and some games turned into upwind, downwind games. And part of the reason Middlebury was able to close that game against GOP out, because GOP wasn't able to work the disc upwind a few times. The rest of round three went to seed and was a little bit uneventful. On to round four, Puget Sound, their defense against Bentley was lights out. Not only that, but their shot selection, they had a lot of risky throws, just like we were talking about with John Brown early in round two, that worked versus the zone and probably shouldn't have. But then it was really their defense in the end, as the throws from UPS got a little less risky. I was talking to Coach Adam Lerman later in the day, and he was saying that their defense was their difference all day long, and they're hoping to bring that into tomorrow as they face off in the quarterfinals. Also in round four, this was a big round deciding who went on to pre-quarters. Lehigh beat Rice. That was a close game and ended on Universe. The Lehigh player made a sick grab in the end zone for that, when Amherst would beat Harding to win Pool B, sending Harding on to playing GOP in pre-quarters. North Park would beat Brandeis to get into pre-quarters. In Pool D, Wake Forest crushed Claremont in the last game of pool play, but Claremont was still able to make it into the pre-quarters because John Brown ran out of gas against Wesleyan. They were running very tight lines and running a lot of zone, even with the tight lines, and even though their players were noticeably gassed. And Wesleyan was able to beat John Brown, sending Claremont on to pre-quarters and John Brown packing. In pre-quarters, we had Claremont versus Bentley, and that was definitely the game of this round. Even though every team this round was noticeably tired, this game was phenomenal. In the first half, Bentley seemed in control after several very long points and took half 8-5 over Claremont. There were some unforced turns on Claremont's part that Bentley was able to capitalize on. But then out of half, Claremont would go on a 5-point run, and it would end up winning the game 11-9. But the big play that really changed the tone of the game was the giant sky for 9-8 Claremont in the end zone. Even though there was a foul called in the play, the observer overruled. It really shifted the momentum. After that, you could see all the Bentley players just hanging their heads. You know, it looked like they were all thinking that that game was over, and it ended up being over. Bentley would only score one more point the rest of the game, and Claremont would win 11-9. In the second half, Claremont dominated on D. They weren't making the silly mistakes they were in the first half, and dominated the air especially. They were not just the one sky to go up 9-8, but skies to go to score to make it 7-8. Bentley tied game at 8s, and then obviously the big one at 9-8. Also in pre-quarters, Stevens Tech beat North Park. Stevens Tech had a big lead early, 7-1, but they let North Park right back in that game towards the end, and unnecessarily drew that game out for Stevens Tech. We'll have to see if that makes them a little more tired tomorrow. They were definitely getting a little frustrated at each other on the sidelines. Lehigh beat Wesleyan, which was a close game for most of the beginning of that game. But towards the end, Lehigh was able to put it away, but that whole game especially was riddled with silly mistakes on both sides because they were both, frankly, very tired teams. The last game in pre-quarters was Carleton College GOP, the defending champions, against Harding. This game would be decided by universe point plays on both sides of the disc. GOP received the disc, and they had a chance to score in the end zone. The throw was a little too far, and even though the GOP player was able to barely get a hand on it, he wasn't able to come down with a catch, giving Harding a chance to break and win the game. They almost immediately hucked the disc down the field, and there was a very questionable foul call, which that would end up being upheld by the observer. And after that, Harding scored an easy upline throw and knocked the defending champions out of the tournament. For quarters tomorrow, we have Harding versus Puget Sound, Stevens Tech versus Wake Forest, Lehigh versus Middlebury, and Claremont versus Amherst. Look for Middlebury and Amherst to possibly have a Northeast matchup again in the semifinals, and look for Puget Sound to continue on to finals. Not really sure how much of a challenge Stevens Tech, Wake Forest, or even Harding in their first game at quarterfinals will give Puget Sound.
On the women's side of things, the story of today was definitely the upper echelon separating themselves from the pack, I would say. Especially number 1 and 2 seeds, which were Valparaiso and Bowdoin. No one scored more than 6 points on either of these teams all day. And especially in the wind, I thought that was really impressive because both these teams have extremely experienced handlers. The first game I watched today was Bowdoin versus St. Ben's, and the player of the game who got the Skied MVP red jersey was Phoebe Aaron of Bowdoin. They were in control the entire game, especially with Aaron's throws, and they took the game, I think, 15-4. Round 2, Claremont took care of Bentley, another one of those upper echelon teams. In Pool C, Claremont and Carleton were clearly head and shoulders above the other two in the pool, and we'll get to that later when they play each other. Otherwise, some of the teams to note, or some of the things that I noticed, were on Williams, number 00, Claire Basher, I think you pronounce it. She's 6'3", and she is a handler for them. And Williams went 4-0 in the day, so we'll see them tomorrow in quarters, but definitely a player to watch out for. And another team that I thought was really interesting was Philadelphia. They have a roster of 10 women, but they made it to quarters tomorrow through the play of Alicia Dixon, who's probably the fastest player on the women's side of this tournament. Moving on to round 3. Valparaiso took on Truman State, who would take second in the pool because Valparaiso beat them 15-6. The game wasn't really close the whole time, just like all the Bowdoin games, really. These teams aren't going to be challenged until maybe semis tomorrow, possibly quarters, but probably semis. And then the big game of the 4th round was Carleton Eclipse versus Claremont. And these were the teams C1 and C2, so they were the top 2 seeds in the C pool. And it was really back and forth. Claremont was keeping it close, and then Carleton managed to pull away after some great plays by their throwers throwing upwind. Carleton's throwers were definitely more consistent with their upwind throws. This game was full of really, really long points. Both teams are having a hard time keeping their hands on the disc and keeping the throws low. But Carleton was definitely more consistent, and they managed to take a 9-6 lead after halftime. But that was all they would score. And after soft cap, Claremont would come back 5 points and take the game 11-9 in probably the game of the day. In the crossovers, Philadelphia beat Elon in an upset. The problem with Philadelphia is that because of their 10 women roster, that they have no legs. So it's too bad because they're full of very experienced players, but I don't think that they'll be able to sustain it tomorrow, sadly. And in the final crossover of the day, St. Ben's played Carleton Eclipse in a regional rematch. And back and forth at the beginning, but Carleton wrapped it up and took the game at the end. Looking at tomorrow, the quarterfinals are Valparaiso versus Swarthmore, Carleton versus Williams, Philadelphia versus Claremont, and Truman versus Bowdoin. I expect Valparaiso and Bowdoin to advance pretty easily. The Carleton versus Williams game is probably going to be the best game of the quarterfinals. Carleton might have underperformed a little bit today, but they let up the gas against Claremont, but that's not their normal MO. But Williams, especially with 6'3" Claire Basher, it'll be definitely interesting to watch because Carleton does not have a very tall team, but they're definitely disciplined, so we'll see how those two styles kind of conflict. If I had to predict, though, I would say that Valparaiso is going to play Carleton in the semifinals, and Claremont is going to play Bowdoin. But the thing is that Valparaiso and Bowdoin are just, to me, so head and shoulders above everybody else that I would say that they're both going to make it to the finals, which is kind of boring because they're the 1 and 2 seeds. But after watching Bowdoin today and watching their domination, I'm going to say that my guess is that they take it in the end. But we'll see. I might look stupid tomorrow.
And that was Saturday here at DIII Nationals. The fields behind us is where you'll see finals tomorrow here, and it's going to be an exciting day of championship bracket on both sides of the disc.